Now turning to our program, please welcome David Haynes, former lead for the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust and Ideas Lab editor for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel.
Hello again, everybody. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today Tom Content. Tom is the Executive Director of the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin. CUB, as you may know, is a nonpartisan independent advocate for Wisconsin utility customers. That's all of us, whether we are homeowners, renters, or small businesses across the state. CUB gets involved in cases involving rate increases, but also in things like how are data centers affecting the state, and what do consumers need to know about that. Tom is also the Vice President of the National Association of State Utility Consumer Advocates. Now, Tom joined CUB in 2017 after, 30 years, Tom, I think it was, as a journalist, and that's how I know Tom. In fact, I hired him at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel some 20 years ago, much to the chagrin of the editor of the Green Bay Press-Gazette, who was losing his best reporter. But it worked out well for the JS. Tom was a terrific reporter. He covered energy and utilities for the Journal-Sentinel, and in 2007, led a team of reporters that won a National Press Foundation Stokes Award for top energy writing in the country. And I'll just add on a personal note, Tom's just a great guy, and I think you'll see that today in his presentation. Tom?
Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks to the club for your service. I want to just start by again recognizing the members of the CUB team who joined. We have Montre Moore, Vice President of our Volunteer Board of Directors, Daniel Narvi, our General Counsel, and Richard Stork, our Director of Outreach and Engagement. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about what we do as the consumer advocate for Wisconsin. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do and how we do it, and then kind of dive into the issues that are top of mind, affordability and data centers. So CUB was founded in 1979. It was actually founded at a time similar to this, where there were a lot of concerns about energy prices going up and energy demand going up really fast as well. So we are a nonpartisan, independent, and nonprofit consumer advocate group representing residential and small business customers, and our main focus is for fairness, but also to make sure that rates are affordable, and we also want reliability and safety in our utility system. This is a photo of the Public Service Commission office over in Madison. Our office is based in Madison as well. And the PSC, in our monopoly system, the PSC regulates the utilities, and it was basically there as a proxy for competition, to set the prices, to make sure things are just and fair for customers. It's a busy agency. They just got some increased funding for the agency from the legislature because of how they're seeing record activity over at the Public Service Commission. We get involved in rate cases, which utilities come in every other year to raise prices. We Energies will be in this year for those in the Milwaukee area of interest. But every year there are 5 major investor-owned utilities in the state. So every year we either have 2 rate cases or 3 rate cases that my regulatory team, which is a 4-person group, economist, regulatory and policy lead, and a utility analyst that we were able to hire away from a utility, who's kind of giving us an inside view on utilities, as well as Daniel, our general counsel. That's who's working for you on behalf of CUB, a nonprofit consumer advocate. So other cases include the big projects to build power plants and power lines. The PSC has to determine if those projects are needed and if the technology that's being chosen is the most cost effective. So we're involved in those proceedings as well. And then there are other smaller cases that actually have big implications. One that just opened is about cost overruns. We've seen a trend of some high cost overruns on construction projects. And so this Public Service Commission, under Governor Evers, launched an investigation into how to make sure that customers may not have to be necessarily on the hook for all the cost overruns that utility projects run into. And so we're looking forward to that case coming forward. There's a lot of focus on affordability, but kind of the looming large right now are the data center cases. And we're involved with one right now with We Energies, as well as another one coming up with Alliant Energy. So just so you have a picture of who a consumer advocate is, in Wisconsin, you can see our color is a little different. Most states actually have a state government agency, whether it's an arm of the Attorney General's office or an arm of a state agency that has a consumer protection role, and they're the ones with attorneys and experts that they hire. Some states in the green have both a nonprofit and a state government agency working for them, including many of our surrounding states. And then CUB and just a couple other states rely on a nonprofit to do this work. Over time, we've saved billions of dollars or helped save billions of dollars through PSC decisions. We're still tallying the numbers from 2025, but even in 2024, $381 million across several cases. The challenge is that the utilities have stepped up their increases, how much they're asking for. So this is how much we've saved versus what they asked for. But our prices have still gone up higher than inflation, even with those savings. So we deliver a lot of bang for the buck, but we have challenges in front of us. We still have energy prices on the rise and that getting more attention here and around the country. And we've got the data center challenge. So as I said, affordability, when I was at the Journal Sentinel, back when it was only a print edition, my stories would run on the business page or inside the business page a lot of days. Today, this is a top tier issue. And you can see that in polling, you can see that in the attention that is focused. You can see that in the election results out east, in Virginia, in New Jersey, in Georgia last November. And unfortunately, one of the casualties of our partisan divide is that energy issues have become too partisan as well. There was a time when in Congress, the only divide over energy issues was regional. Hydro states versus coal states versus wind states. Now it's gotten too partisan, especially for a nonpartisan nonprofit. So anyway, on the subject of inflation, we are seeing higher trends, both with We Energies in particular, prices rising above the rate of inflation, both in the recent past as well as over the long term, 20 years. Just between 2022 and 26, 2026 right now, with the increase that just hit bills this month, it's about a 32% increase for a typical residential customer on the electric side of their bill over that four-year period. So it's a lot. We're concerned about that pace, and we know that nationally energy prices are a driver of inflation, and we're seeing that here as well, I think. In terms of, we have a chart that shows this for residential that's very similar, but just to show you from the small business perspective as well, that we rank second highest in the Midwest in terms of the electricity prices that folks are paying. That's across the state. So what the PSC's role is then is to really balance the interests of the utility, and the utility has a fiduciary responsibility to work on behalf of their shareholders, and then to balance that with the needs of the customers and the customers who are paying the bills. So this is our chief economist, Steve Keim. He is a great speaker as well, if you want to dive into why utility profits are so high. And that's, he is our, for job one for him is to really tackle that issue, because so much of what gets embedded into a rate case every year is how much the utility is going to earn on their profit. And so that's a key focus for us. The state has brought down the levels of the profit over time somewhat, but not enough. they're still higher than the national average. And so we're a group that we partner with sometimes is called Power Lines. They're a recent nonprofit, recently formed nonprofit in the last couple of years that is trying to generate awareness about what they call the Supreme Court Justices of Energy. So when I talk about the Public Service Commission of Wisconsin, it's the three most important people in state government that most people have never heard about. They're appointees of the governor, but they have huge power in terms of what we pay, what our energy future looks like, and how much accountability and kind of oversight of the utilities there is. So this Power Lines did a poll last year that talked about public perceptions of utility bills. Before I get to that, this slide shows just the share of natural gas and electricity relative to other drivers of inflation. So Americans are concerned. It doesn't matter. Whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent. People are concerned about affordability. That shouldn't be a shock. Shouldn't be a shock. Do you agree that your state government does a good job of protecting my interests by and large? That there's a strongly or somewhat disagree with that. So that's a challenge as well. And people feel powerless. They feel like they can't control. There are programs that help you save on your bills. Focus on energy. If you don't listen to what my message today, listen to the fact that Focus on Energy can give you free stuff, any utility to help save on your bills, free energy packs. But I'm always doing an ad for that while I'm talking because I know people don't know that enough. But this concern, the feeling powerless, is something, and what's changed in the recent months is kind of what we're seeing is more of a backlash on the whole data center issue. And so Marquette did a poll in October that also ranked inflation and the cost of living as the number one issue. And it was number one for Democrats, number one for independents, and number two for Republicans. So affordability is job one right now. And then on the issue of data centers, it was also bipartisan. When Marquette asked Wisconsinites that they surveyed, do the costs of data centers outweigh the benefits? A majority agreed that the costs outweigh the benefits. And so that's where I want to talk a little bit about the challenge of data centers, and it starts with just how much energy they use. They are the new ones. We already have dozens of data centers in the state serving telecom, serving kind of the back office, serving the cloud. But really this AI investment wave, and if you've seen the headlines on the AI investment bubble that are pretty much visible on MarketWatch every other day, then that's where this is really centered on. And so you're seeing a lot of hype. I have DeepSeek up here. That's a Chinese company that came up with a technology that uses energy does AI a lot more efficiently than some of the folks like OpenAI and others are talking about. So there's a concern about how much customers could get saddled with extra bills. The intent of both Microsoft and We Energies and Vantage is not to shoulder costs on other bills. I give them credit for that. But when in our world, the consumer advocate role isn't that much different from journalism in some ways, because when a case starts, the PSC staff auditors and our staff ask a lot of questions. We ask questions like, well, why did you say this? Why does this line on page 42 say this instead of that? And what is the meaning of that? And so it's really a trust but verify kind of role that we have. And I had an editor, I can't remember which one, who I always memorialized this for me. And he said, if your mother says she loves you, check it out, find another source. And so we want to make sure that it is a case of trust but verify. And the energy, but the size of this is orders of magnitudes bigger than what we're used to. The largest We Energies customer today uses under 100 megawatts of electricity. And if you think about how much energy these two projects, Racine and Port Washington, this is the equivalent of putting 35 of those factories in Port Washington and 18 in Mount Pleasant. In other words, it took We Energies 125 years to go from from no demand for electricity when it was just starting to 5,000 megawatts. 125 years. They founded as the Wisconsin Electric Railway in 1896. And in the next 5 to 10 approximately years, we're going to double that. We're going to go from 5 to 10, 5,000 to 10,000. And those new 5,000 are just for those two sites, Mount Pleasant and Port Washington. So that's as much energy as all the customers, 1.1 million customers of We Energies used last year, including all the cities you see on the screen. So, as I said, Microsoft and We Energies have been saying the right things in public. I give them credit. Microsoft says we're committed to paying our fair share for the assets needed to serve our data center. We Energies said we can accommodate data centers without raising prices for everybody else. And that's the goal. That's the goal of us. That's the goal of the utility. But again, it's trust but verify. And what we're seeing is the tech companies are going around the country and shopping for sites. You're seeing opposition rise up in certain communities in Wisconsin now about data center projects. A village near Green Bay rejected a data center last night after I finished this PowerPoint. And so the challenge is how much energy is actually good. How much of this is real? How much of this could be threatened by an AI bubble? I don't know if there's going to be an AI bubble, but we have to think about this because power plants are paid for over a long period of time. A power plant is paid for over 40 to 50 years. And if business plans change, we don't want to be left holding the bag. This is a ditto slide, but I like to emphasize that. These are some of the other projects that have been talked about. I thought I had, so the project in Greenleaf was on, and Menominee and Caledonia are not on this slide because those have been rejected. Janesville is still considering one actually at the site of the former GM plant. And so, but it's really two utilities so far that we're seeing a lot of the attention with data centers. And so this is all playing out at the Public Service Commission. Just in the last, since September 1, We Energies has filed about a dozen applications for $6 billion of projects, of new projects to serve the data centers. And with the idea being that and what our hope and wish is that the data centers will pay full freight for that. And then as well, ATC, the transmission company, has proposed new lines both in the Racine County area as well as north of Port Washington. Folks in West Bend, Saukville, Fredonia are mobilizing about that. It's actually a staggeringly expensive project to me, even to me, because even though I covered this for a while, this one's $1.5 billion just to plug in the Port Washington data center. And so the case that we're centered on right now is the case involving how much the data centers will pay and the framework that We Energies has created for that. And so as I said earlier, the concern is how much these long-term decisions over of the fact that these things are paid off over 40 to 50 years, what's the outlook? And the fact is, we are already still paying for power plants that have been shut down. This is a photo that was screen grab of a video that Fox 6 shot when the plant, the tower, the smokestack, and the plant was coming down at the coal plant in Pleasant Prairie just 7 or 8 years ago. And we still owe money on that plant that is still being reflected in our bills. CUB worked with We Energies to reduce that somewhat through through a refinancing of some of that cost, but a lot of that cost that they're still earning, a lot of the cost of that plant and that most of that $1 billion, they're still earning a nearly 10% profit on that even after it's been torn down. So I think you've been hearing about the AI bubble, and I think the challenge is we're trying to make 40-year decisions at a time when there's so much changing moment to moment. And maybe it's just because I'm a news junkie, but there's a lot happening in this space. Just last week, you can see on the bottom there, the CEO of NVIDIA announced a new chip at the Consumer Electronics Show. The new chip is going to, he said, would dramatically reduce the cooling needs for data centers. And so what happened? The stocks of Modine, Johnson Controls, and Trane all went down after he said those words because they're all working on cooling technologies for data centers. But what does this mean for us as ratepayers? If they need less electricity to cool the thing, how are they going to need? Is the utility actually going to need $6 billion worth of new infrastructure for these projects? That's a question. It's a question that's emerging, and then the concern about the AI bubble. There's not just one, but a few Chinese companies now that have come out with AI developments that are, in their words, costing a lot less than kind of the Sam Altman OpenAI vision of investing $1 trillion. And that's why as somebody who's watched this utility industry a long time, now it was from a perspective of a small nonprofit, it's always been kind of a David versus Goliath kind of challenge. But now you've got one tech company has the market cap of bigger than probably the whole utility sector. And so now you've got tech companies and utilities and CUB trying to we're trying to make sure that things are fair for everybody. So the AI bubble is a concern for this as well. And so the real question is the devil's in the details from our point of view. And so we just had the opportunity to file testimony last week. So we had 3 experts file testimony, one about reliability, the need for reliability, because these are such big users on one site that if a data center suddenly goes offline, that could create a reliability challenge. We had one talking about consumer protections to make sure, basically my lead expert found that there are some loopholes in what We Energies has filed. By and large, we think We Energies has come up with a pretty good framework for protecting other customers, but there is still risk of cost shifts to other customers unless the PSC improves what they came up with. And then my lead economist, I would describe his testimony this way. It's the show me the money. Basically, the We Energies proposal, there are 2 options for how tech companies would have to put up money to kind of guarantee that they're going to pay for the costs of power plants that are normally paid off over decades. And one of them is to put up the money, letter of credit, financing, and the other one is it's kind of a slippery slope. They're saying if you have a good credit rating and you meet some other provisions, then you can accomplish this. You can also do this. And so our proposal is, let's not have this. However, let's remove the part that gives the tech companies an out. If they're committed to paying their fair share, they have a lot of money. They should be able to handle the financial guarantees and that they're needed to protect customers. And so my economist, his testimony does not have Tom Cruise or any other actors in Jerry Maguire in his testimony, but that's the essence. But there are key issues in this case, and this case is going to public hearing just in about a month's time. Customers don't want to be left holding the bag. The issue of financial guarantees that I just mentioned. The question of transmission lines, we're getting assurances that transmission costs are going to be something that where the tech companies will be responsible for. But right now, that's, we're still in the trust but verify on that one too. We're not, I think there are loopholes. The fact is that American Transmission Company, which operates the power lines, the big high voltage transmission lines that go from state to state, their rates are actually set out at the FERC in Washington DC instead of here at the PSC. So there's an issue of, even if this We Energies tariff, the We Energies plan to make the data centers pay their fair share, even if that is approved, will we as the residential and small business and other customers, big customers too, be shouldering costs for transmission lines? That's an open question. In fact, at the Foxconn site, the former Foxconn site where Microsoft is today, it was about just less than 10 years ago that ATC got approval to build about a $100 million power line for Foxconn that Microsoft would now be the beneficiary of, primary beneficiary of. And that was paid for by customers from, Kenosha to Manitowoc to Madison to Marquette, Michigan, because that's ATC's costs are spread across. So there are already costs that have been incurred, the customers are paying for. And then the other issue that is really, I think we don't want this to be a set and forget kind of an issue. Set and forget is fine for a thermostat, or your budget bill if you're on the budget billing plan. But for this one, we want to make sure there's an ongoing way for the PSC to follow up on if it approves these tariffs that We Energies has proposed, and say and have a check-in, whether it's in every other year in rate cases, some other format, so that we can actually run the numbers after the centers are open to say, okay, did it work? Did this proposal work and protect customers? And if it didn't, how can we fix that and bring costs that Microsoft and OpenAI weren't responsible for get shifted back to us, to the residential customers. As I said, there's a public hearing on February 10th. So as of now, it's just a virtual hearing. Whether they have an in-person hearing, we don't know. We won't know yet for a bit. But as of now, there's information about that and more information about data centers, including some interesting reports if you want to dive deep. On our website, we have a data centers webpage on our website. Just a quick thing before I turn to questions. Just looking ahead, we have. I think we're in a world where nuclear's in the news. Nuclear's being talked about in the legislature. We Energies is talking about nuclear at the Kewaunee site. I think over the long term, there's going to be nuclear is still a very expensive technology here to date, and is expected to be. The most recent nuclear plant opened just in the last year or two in Georgia, and it was originally supposed to cost $14 billion. But it ended up costing $35 billion instead of $14 billion. So these things aren't cheap. There's new technology in nuclear that's supposed to be more efficient than the 1970s and even the 1980s and 90s technology. But I think we're going to have a race. Having covered Johnson Controls when I was at the paper, I got to know their battery division, and they did a lot of research. And then even at UW-Madison and Milwaukee were opening energy storage labs at their engineering schools. And so the race over the next 20 to 30 years is going to be between nuclear, in terms of cost-effective technologies, nuclear and long-duration energy storage. So right now, everything in batteries is lithium-ion, from your phones to cars to energy storage projects that are now on the grid. And We Energies has built energy storage projects already to help back up solar, and they have more in the queue. So I think that's going to be a long-term race. On the consumer side and on the legislative side, and I could take questions too, but on that. But right now, there's actually a lot of activity there as well. The Democrats, Jody Haber-Sinekin, put out a bill that would regulate data centers and have more transparency about energy and water issues. And just Fridays, the Republican Assembly several members of the Republican Assembly, Representative Sullivan from the Hudson area and others proposed some legislation as well. So we're watching that. We think as a state that we need better planning. There are proposals in the legislature to that haven't emerged in this session, but probably will soon, or next session, to have better planning as a state. Right now, the PSC is too often, we're going down this highway toward the energy future without a GPS. And I think the utilities have all the information about what they want to do, but in order to have a state, in order for those three commissioners who make all those decisions about energy to have the best information, we need a better planning process. And overall, we need more balanced utility regulation. I would highlight the most recent issue, this month's issue of Harper's. Harper's Magazine has an article about what's driving your utility bills up. It quotes my chief economist. He gets like 2 sentences, but it's a nice, it's an in-depth look if you want to do a deep dive on what's driving up energy prices and how to get involved. The PSC will be opening a public comment period on this data center case, and that decision will probably be. That case will probably be decided in maybe the April to May timeframe, roughly. And then around April 1, we should have more information about what We Energies is proposing in terms of potential rate hikes for the next 2 years, 27 and 28. So that gets me to the end of my remarks. I have a sign-up sheet out front if you want to do it the old-fashioned way with a pen. I've got a QR code. This is how you sign up for updates from CUB. But I'm ready to hear what good questions you have. Thanks.
Thanks so much for being here today, Tom. If you have a question, please join me up here and introduce yourself. And if you can get to your question within 30 seconds or less, then we can get to more questions.
Hi, my name is Chris Henricks. I've read that anywhere between 20 hours and 100 hours a year, if these data centers would go offline, off the grid, we wouldn't be having, the power supply issues based on, maybe battery storage on their sites or solar or something like that. What's the truth in that? Is that reasonable?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. On the issue of backup power, and I think all the data centers are proposing diesel generators to back themselves up, to back up their own site if the power goes down from the grid. But I think what we'd like to see more of is the use of demand response, which actually takes when energy prices are high or when the grid might be challenged to a certain point that they can ramp down more automatically and quickly. We think there are actually data center developer companies that are integrating batteries right into the site. What we've seen with the hyperscalers, they're like, if you think of the Magnificent Seven stocks, the hyperscalers, they're interested in 24/7 operation for these data centers, 365. So that's a challenge that we're gonna be facing. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Pedro Edkey. So this is specifically related to ATC and the power lines.
Sure.
Can you speak to how the consumers will be impacted based off of whether those lines, existing lines are enhanced or upgraded versus brand new lines and pathways are built?
Sure. I mean, in the case of a project that just opened on Western Wisconsin, CUB had actually supported a smaller upgrade and not the big project that was proposed. For these new lines, it's really we've gotten involved. The case just opened, so we don't know where we're going. We haven't done all the investigating and asked all our questions yet, so I don't have a lot to say there, except we know that there's a lot of routing concerns, siting concerns. Even the Common Council of Port Washington is coming out with a certain preferred route, I understand now. And then I've heard talk that if if that site actually does max out up to 3,500 megawatts of electricity, that it may not be a question of proposed and alternate route. I've heard people say that ATC, that they're concerned that you might need both. So I don't know that for certain. So we're still digging into that case.
Jeff Smoller, this is a political economy question. There was a time in Wisconsin, I used to be a DNR regulator, when you talked about the Wisconsin Paper Council, you were dealing with people you knew, and you could cut deals, basically, for the good of the state. You talked about the Big Five and add ATC to that. That's the Wisconsin Energy Club.
Right.
The Midwest Independent System Operator recently gave transmission rights to an Ohio company and Illinois company. Obviously, Illinois was very, very critical of that. Do you have any thoughts on whether the little club, if you will, of the 5 utilities and ATC, if it stays are numbered, and the regulatory and fiscal impact of that?
Based on the MISO?
Based on that decision, is it a first entry into breaking up the Wisconsin club, basically?
Yeah, so the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has allowed competition for building of these interstate transmission lines, and that as actually a response to concerns about price increases and energy inflation. ATC and Dairyland both were American Transmission Company and Dairyland both bid on those projects. I thought that they would be the winners. I thought that they would find a way to sharpen their pencils and make this a hometown win for customers. Unfortunately, those projects are going to be built by other utilities. One of them is a venture of some of the largest utilities in the country. I think that's just one little area of the system where you're going to see some out-of-state entry, but it doesn't really fundamentally address the monopoly system for households and businesses.
So you don't see a cascading effect then?
No, I don't see a cascading effect from that. Good question.
Hi, my name is Teresa Esser. In 2009, 2010, and 2011, I worked with partners to raise a venture capital fund. One of our primary investments was a technology that would significantly reduce the amount of electricity that was required for cooling data centers. Hardcore Computer became Liquid Cooled Solutions. That was 17 years ago. The thing I took away from the NVIDIA CEO's speech was that they went from 80% liquid cooled to 100% liquid cooled at their, recently. So the technology prevailed. Of course, 17 years is the legal life of a patent, the amount of protection you get. But what I want to know is our pitch was 2% of the electricity in the United States was going into data centers in 2009, 2010, 2011. Is it still 2%? What percent of electricity in the United States is being used on data centers? And then solar. When I drive into Minnesota, I see solar panels, solar farms. I didn't see solar in your presentation. Where's the solar? And why don't we have solar powering the data centers?
Great questions. Thank you, Teresa. So on the first one, the forecasts are significant. I think this is off the top, but I'm pretty sure that the forecast for about 5 or 10 years out would show that data center would represent about 10% of electricity use. There are some recent studies on that across the country. So really, and the fact is, the utility industry in response to this wave, the EEI, the Edison Electric Institute, announced last summer that the 5-year capital spending plan for all the utilities was $1 trillion in 5 years. And so they just came out with a new number last week. It's gone up 10% since last summer. It's now $1.1 trillion over 5 years. And so I think it speaks to that this demand is surging. On solar, I had a slide on solar and I took it out. Solar is one of the most cost-effective technologies, and there's actually concern right now in the legislature about the data center bill that was just introduced on Friday. There's a hearing tomorrow on this bill because the solar is so cost effective that utilities are turning, and We Energies and other utilities are turning to it in rapidly over the last 8 to 10 years. The costs have come down 90%, 95% in a short period of time. It's projected to be the dominant global electricity source over time. And so the problem with the data center bill is there's such opposition to solar farms in rural Wisconsin that I think the legislators were being responsive to that. They're requiring that all the solar projects be located on the site of the data center, which is logistically engineering and it's unfeasible and it's a non-starter. It's basically, We Energies has, out of that $6 billion in new investment, it's probably, at least half of that is for, I don't have the exact numbers, but I think about half of that at least is solar, and they wouldn't be able to build any of those projects if this bill were to pass. So I think there's a wave of anti-solar sentiment, and I know we're not Renew Wisconsin, we're not an environmental group, we're the consumer advocate, but the economics of solar are fantastic, even without the tax credits.
Thank you. My name is Fred Bursch. Renewable energy was one of my questions, whether or not we're going to be taking our eye off of renewable projects because we're trying to meet this other demand in other ways. So you largely answered that, but also as one of many members here who have solar on our homes,
Yes.
how is CUB helping with the net metering challenge that we have and balance, our programs in the state of Wisconsin with our various utilities, and each utility has a different agreement, and how we're balancing that with other states in the country? Sure.
That's a really good question. On the home front, it was about 4 years ago, maybe a little longer, when We Energies actually announced a surcharge on solar, kind of a solar tax. And we opposed that strongly. We said that didn't make sense, and they dropped that proposal after opposition from a number of groups, including us. And on the issue of, there's a statewide analysis by the PSC that's underway on that issue. And I think from where Cub lands, Renew Wisconsin would like net metering to be preserved at the best cost for solar customers forever. Our view is that there's probably a middle point between how far things came down for solar customers in, say, the mid in the teens, 2015. 2018, after the Walker Commission came in, there was a lot of attention on the net metering issue then, and then so we think there's a balance, and we think more and more solar is going to be needed. I think over time, other utilities in other states, Arizona, Massachusetts, Connecticut, are turning to rooftop solar and home batteries on those peak summer days to help the grid. So we want to make sure that that solar policies make sense for the customers with solar and for everybody. Thanks.
More generally, does the Public Service Commission have any authority to consider environmental impacts, including cumulative impacts of developments like data centers and the rest of the uses?
That's a really good question. I think that gets back to what I was talking about planning. Unfortunately, we have kind of a siloed process right now. Wisconsin used to have a better planning process years ago, but it had its flaws, and so we're not advocating a return to that system. But the challenge is those impacts don't get recognized, don't get evaluated, because every case has to be decided on its own merits. So if there are like the two natural gas plant cases that PSC approved last spring. In that case, it was only about that one plant, and then the next place it was only about that one plant. And so there's no like overarching comprehensive look. And that's what the acronym is IRP. I was going to try not to use jargon today, but integrated resource planning is really what's something that when Senator Coles was in the legislature as a Republican, he was a big fan of that. He retired last year. Now he's on our board of directors. And so we're trying to see if there's a way to make sure that can happen. There is kind of another partisan thing about environmental externalities. Some of the blue states actually have changed changed the regulations so that they put a price on carbon, for instance, and so that the charge of the Public Service Commission in, say, Maryland or Massachusetts or California or Illinois is both about safety, reliability, affordability, but it's also about decarbonization and environmental impacts.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Tom.
Sure.